Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 22 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks as they took on the St. Louis Blues and lost by a score of 3-2 in the shootout. This is the Sharks' fourth shootout of the season and their fourth loss in such a situation, which is honestly kind of surprising. Obviously, the Sharks don't have the best of the best team on paper when it comes to playing a full 60-minute 5-on-5 game of hockey, but the shootout is an entirely different beast. It's a skills competition, and the Sharks do have some pretty good talent in their lineup. Celebrini, Granlund, Eklund, Smith, even though he didn't play here tonight, Will Smith at the very least didn't play here tonight. He was in the lineup for the three previous shootout games. You would think that the Sharks would have been able to at least fall backwards into one of four victories, but unfortunately not the case. And it's not so disappointing because the Sharks are leaving points on the table. By the end of this season, it's not as though the Sharks will be within a couple of points of a playoff spot, and we're going to look back at these moments and say, if only they had gotten a couple of extra shootout victories. That is unlikely to be the case, but what is making it disappointing is that you are leaving some good feelings and some positive vibes on the table by losing these ones. The Sharks players are going to head back to the locker room and they're going to be thinking, oh, well, what could have been if I had made this play, if I had made that pass, if I had taken that shot. But if they had actually gotten these victories, or at least a victory like here tonight, they could have gone back to the locker room and, put those worries on the back burner and thought, hey, good vibes, let's party. We actually managed to win this game, even if they didn't actually come out and play particularly well, which is indeed the case here tonight. Second half of a back-to-back with some travel, it was expected that the Sharks would come out slow, but they came out incredibly slow. It wasn't just the first few minutes, though they did give up a goal in the first 11 seconds. It was the first two periods of this game where the Sharks just looked completely out of sync. To give some credit to them, I will say they actually managed to shut down the Blues at least a decent amount. The few chances that the Blues did get, they either managed to score, like in the Kyrou situation, or the first goal of this game from Walker, or their goaltender was able to come up with some big saves. But it's not as though the Blues were just absolutely throwing chance after chance on net here. The Sharks found themselves, even after a pretty slow start, a game that they probably won't be super proud of, only down by one goal heading into the third period. And we know, as of late, over these last few weeks, the Sharks, this felt like a we have them right where we want them type of situation. They thrive when playing from behind. You'd like to see them thrive when playing with a lead, but, baby steps, I guess. And so when they were down by one goal, they did wake up for sure in that third period. They started to actually get some chances. Not a ton. It's not as though this was a dominant third period for them, but they had some good looks to beat Binnington, but none actually managing to do so. The Sharks either making saves for the Blues goaltender or generally just missing the net with some of their shots. And then we got to the 6-on-5 situation at the end here, and actually there were some positives. In particular, we have Macklin Celebrini, who manages to win 3 straight offensive zone faceoffs, which for an 18-year-old in the NHL is not an easy thing to do. And yet each time the Sharks would get clean possession off of those faceoff wins, it would end up on Mikael Granlund's stick at the blue line, and all 3 times he would fumble the puck, which would allow the Blues to either clear or, worse, actually get a chance on net. And it was again Celebrini who has to step up in a big way with a diving poke check to get the puck off of the stick of Robert Thomas, prevent him from putting the game away with that empty netter and keeping things alive for the Sharks. And it ended up being a good thing because off of a face-off loss, interestingly enough, the Sharks get back possession, and eventually it is Alex Wennberg's second of the game that ties this one up at 2 with just 9 seconds remaining to force that overtime. The Sharks in the 3-on-3 5-minute overtime, they do get some possession, they do get some chances, the closest of course being Macklin Celebrini's post that prevented him from being a second straight overtime game winner for himself. But unfortunately the overtime comes and goes, no goals for San Jose, and the shootout, of course, as it has all season, plagues them here, and they lose it 3-2. Moving on to the players to talk about, before we actually get into the forwards, which is usually where I start, we'll actually flip this one on its head here and discuss the Sharks goaltender, because it was Yaroslav Askarov's first start of his San Jose Sharks career. He had played a couple of games with Nashville, but with San Jose, this was his first game, and obviously it didn't come out the gate very, very strong. I mentioned that the Sharks gave up a goal 11 seconds into this one, and this wasn't so much because the Sharks played it horribly, but Askarov just kind of gave the puck away in a really, really bad spot coming out of his net for this one, so not the greatest start for him, but he clearly very much settled in as this one went on. He only let in one other goal from Kyrou, which is maybe one he could have had, but it's also a little bit lucky for from Kyrou for sure, but we saw him make some really big saves here tonight, and his stats end up actually being quite good with just the 2 goals in regulation that he ended up giving up. When it comes to more of a scouting report on this goaltender, obviously it is only a single game, but there are a few things that I did notice. When it comes to his aggressiveness in terms of playing the puck, we saw that did backfire just in those first 11 seconds, and there was also another moment just a couple of minutes later that came relatively close to backfiring, but it is quite clear that he is someone who is willing to play the puck in these types of situations. He just needs to kind of iron out a few of the issues there. He is also an incredibly athletic goaltender. His ability to cover down low, slide across the net, he reminds me in a way of a Jonathan Quick, the starting goaltender for the Los Angeles Kings for many years when the Sharks were actually really good and faced off against LA pretty consistently in the playoffs. Jonathan Quick was a thorn in the Sharks' side, and it was a similar play style here for Askarov. His rebound control could use a little bit of work, but I liked his ability to track the puck. He seemed to usually always know where things were actually being. And so I thought this was a very successful first game for Askarov. Without that small mistake to start, perhaps, it would have even been a better look, obviously, for him, but definitely can't be too upset with how it went. When it comes to the Sharks forwards now, to move on to that, we have the Sharks top line, the Lund line, Eklund, Zetterlund, Granlund, very interestingly kept together here. You might be thinking, well, of course, they'll keep the Lund line together, but there was a substitution here into the lineup. Will Smith steps out in favor of Givani Smith, a combination likely of a development day, considering this was the second half of a back-to-back with travel, but also the fact that Smith just simply was not very good yesterday against the Dallas Stars, so he steps out, but because of that, it is a bit of a step back, or honestly a lot of a step back from an offensive perspective for the Sharks' bottom 9 here. So if there ever was a moment to separate these 3 players, it would have been now to kind of spread the love a little bit, but Warsofsky decides to keep the 3 of them together, and so that puts a lot of the offensive onus on them. They needed to be a big driving force here for the Sharks, and honestly through the first 40 minutes they absolutely were not. That is a strong correlation for why the Sharks seemed slow to start this game. It's because Granlund, Eklund, and Zetterlund weren't really doing their thing. You can commend it from an individual standpoint Granlund for being able to pick up a couple of primary assists here tonight. Just generally the fact that he was even able to be in the lineup after that high hit he took from Lyubushkin at the end of the Dallas Stars game yesterday is also quite commendable, but still those first 2 periods of this game just not really good enough for any of these 3 players, even though in the 3rd period they definitely brought it back and started to get some good offensive zone shifts. When it comes to Fabian Zetterlund, he was actually practically invisible. At least Granlund and Eklund showed up sometimes in those first couple of periods, but Zetterlund, I just didn't really see him all that much. In the 3rd, he started to put himself in better positions. His team was also managing to work him the puck a bit more in those dangerous areas. He ended up missing the net. Probably could have had a goal if he had just a bit more better finish in that area, but still, I guess Zetterlund finishes off strong, and then the same must be said about William Eklund. Not a great start, but an okay enough finish to be, I won't say disappointed with this group of players, disappointed with these 3 players as a line, but they definitely should have been better, and that would have helped the Sharks out immensely. When it comes to the Sharks' second line, we have Celebrini with Goodrow. Of course, that dynamic duo here kept together from Ryan Warsofsky. Couldn't possibly ever separate these 2. They're like 2 peas in a pod, of course. And then when it comes to their 3rd line with Will Smith out, it is Tyler Toffoli who steps in here. This is a good thing because I would not have wanted to see Celebrini surrounded by not just 1 but 2 grinders with 0 offensive talent. Toffoli pretty much needed to jump up here, and I would wanted to see originally Toffoli playing with Celebrini and Smith, because I thought that would be an interesting combination where Celebrini and Smith could work the puck between each other with their passing plays and then have the play finish with Toffoli putting himself in a good scoring position to get a great chance on net. But here, with Smith out of the lineup, Celebrini isn't going to be bouncing pucks off of Goodrow, obviously not. And so you kind of needed Toffoli to sort of fill in that role, and I was a bit nervous that he wouldn't be able to do so. While we have seen some skill plays from Toffoli at times this season, it's usually very few and far between, and more often than not, he's just kind of scoring goals, which is fine. It fits its own role, but I wasn't sure how well it was going to be here, and yet we saw Toffoli step up in a very big way. I was actually very impressed with what Toffoli was able to do. Sure, You can put a lot of that credit to Macklin Celebrini, who I think was just so overwhelmingly good. I'll get to that in a little bit. But Toffoli certainly did his job. I think he filled his role rather well, and I was impressed, and I thought he was one of the Sharks' better players here tonight. When it comes to Celebrini, as I said, he was so overwhelmingly good here tonight. He was the Sharks' best player by far. You know, even though he wasn't the goal scorer, Wennberg puts up 2 goals, I would still rank Celebrini above him. Not only was Celebrini making up the only line that was actually even remotely good in these first couple of periods of this game, it seemed as though during the second intermission, he put his head down and he said, I'm going to make an impact on this game. Because in the third period, every single shift, I feel like, he came out and he did something spectacular. Not just like pretty good, not just okay, spectacular from him. He's making plays off the boards, he's making plays at the blue line, he's getting these passes through, he's getting some good shots off, he's making defenders who have been in the NHL for multiple years like Parayko and Falk just look absolutely silly. It was such a great third period in particular for Macklin Celebrini, and then I already talked about the multiple offensive zone faceoff wins, which is so difficult as an 18-year-old. You know, so there are many transferable skills from college to the NHL. Faceoffs are not really one of them. That's something that needs many repetitions to do when you're going up against guys who have taken hundreds, if not thousands of faceoffs in their career. To be someone immediately stepping in, you don't know the tricks of the trade necessarily, but this just goes to show how much of an effort Celebrini is making to improve even in those areas where he is somewhat at a disadvantage in. He was a good faceoff guy here tonight. We also saw that diving play that kept the game alive. We saw the overtime post. So there's a lot to love about the game that he had here tonight. And he's even rewarded with a couple of secondary assists. Not exactly like assists that are directly leading to these goals, but the fact is that he was so good, it was nice to see him get those couple of points on the board to show for it. And then when it comes to the final player on this line, we do have Barclay Goodrow. I will say at the top of this is that I didn't think Goodrow was actually all that bad. I thought he was okay here. Clearly not anywhere near Celebrini, clearly not anywhere near Tyler Toffoli, but he wasn't a huge liability here. The thing is, when it comes to Goodrow, I've already criticized his lack of offensive talent. I criticized his inability to even do what he does best when it came to last game against the Dallas Stars. But really what does bother me, and it's not even so much from an analytical perspective, but more so just from like an emotional response, Goodrow is just a boring player to have on this second line. You know, when Celebrini steps onto the ice, you want to see some excitement. That's why it was so fun to see Celebrini paired with Will Smith, where even if there could be some defensive errors, even if there could be some giveaways, which were to be expected, when they did manage to connect, which was multiple times, it was very, very exciting to watch as a product on the ice. And with Goodrow there, it's just kind of not. Like, imagine if there was like a third really good player, or at least pretty good player in this role who could really work off of Celebrini and Toffoli, like someone like Will Smith. That would be something fun to watch. But with Goodrow here, it's just kind of like, you know, you're just kind of falling asleep a little bit when it comes to him. So Celebrini is still a very, very big piece. Obviously, it's just, that's really kind of, again, a more of an emotional response, but something that I do feel somewhat strongly about. When it comes to the Sharks' third line, we had a bit of a substitution here, of course, with Toffoli jumping up to the second. We had Klim Kostin coming up here to the third. This is after he had put up a few good games-ish on the fourth line. He had one really good one, and last game it wasn't all that great, but it was still like okay enough, not major mistakes. So he ends up getting the chance here with Dellandrea and Cunnin, so it was kind of like a Frankenstein third line in a way. The real standout player, of course, on this third line was Alex Wennberg. He picks up those 2 goals, which was very, very nice to see. Great one on the first, and then also somehow manages to get this through a sea of bodies on the second one to tie this game with just 9 seconds remaining. Even without these goals, it felt as though he was the only one, honestly, of this third line who was actually making anything happen. What was interesting about this trio of players is that they did get chances in this game. I think they had 3 different 2-on-1s through the first couple of periods in this one. Only one of them actually led to a decent chance, which was from a good pass from Wennberg to Kostin, and then he's unable to bring it around Binnington for that goal. But besides that, most of the time they were playing in the defensive zone. When it comes to those 2 wingers, I already talked about Wennberg. Cunnin gets the step up here. It felt as though he was playing with a lot of energy early on in this game. He's throwing his body around, he's trying to be physical, but actually from a defensive standpoint, he really wasn't all that good. He was actually kind of bad. And when it comes to Klim Kostin, there was that offensive moment on the 2-on-1. That was nice to see, but we also did get to see a classic Klim Kostin moment a giveaway. I can't remember if this was in the second or perhaps the third period, where he has the puck below the goal line. He's not really under a ton of pressure. There's like one guy coming near him, so maybe he felt a little bit pressured to make a quick play, but he just passes this puck right up the middle to nobody, and the Blues end up getting a pretty decent chance. And then what actually really bothered me about this is that we see Kostin go back to the bench, and I don't know if they showed this on the Sharks broadcast. I got the St. Louis Blues broadcast, but they show on the bench Kostin actually having not an aggressive word, but like a pretty strong word with Jack Thompson. Almost felt as though Kostin was blaming Thompson in this situation for giving away the puck, but this wasn't like a reverse where he thought Thompson would be in the right spot. He knows where Thompson is on the ice, and he still plays it right up the middle. That's just completely boneheaded situation there, but that's something we have come to expect from Kostin. It hadn't happened for these last couple of games, but it's been a theme for him thus far this season. When it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, we have Grundstrom with Dellandrea and Givani Smith. This fourth line, again, just didn't really make much of an impact here for the second straight game now in this back-to-back. Givani Smith, I legitimately did not notice him in the first period. You know, I talked about how Zetterlund was like somewhat invisible, but obviously I knew he was in the lineup. I actually went out of my way at the end of the first period to check Givani Smith's ice time, because I was thinking that he maybe didn't even get a shift in the first period with how little he did. Ended up that he had about 1 minute and 40 seconds, which is still not a lot, but it was 3 shifts on the ice. That's just how pretty much nothing they did. As the game wore on, they did end up having a couple of okay shifts, I'll give them that, but there was nothing really good about this fourth line. When it comes to the Sharks' defensive pairings, we have the top one of Walman and Ceci. There's some good and there's some bad here. I liked Jake Walman's ability to jump into the play. As per usual, it is his offense that you're actually praising him on, but there were some moments defensively that left you scratching your head at least a little bit. It wasn't the egregious turnovers, I would say, but there have been moments thus far this season where Walman is just finding himself really far out of position, and we saw actually early on in the third period, the Blues get a really great chance, I believe, from Brandon Saad. I think this was just a minute into the game, or into the period, and it is a miscommunication between Walman and Ceci. Obviously, Ceci is not escaping any blame here, because Walman finds himself on the right side of the ice. Of course, as a left-handed defenseman, it's a little bit awkward, and Ceci, instead of filling in for Walman and keeping coverage on that left side, he goes to the right side, which you could say is technically where he belongs as a righty, but you should see and react to Walman being there, and that ends up leading Saad completely uncovered. So it is a combination of Walman not being, or somewhat being out of position, as well as Cody Ceci just sort of not thinking straight, which has been also a theme for him at times this season. And so I wouldn't say this was a bad game for this first pairing. I thought Walman had some really good moments, and Ceci wasn't terrible defensively, but there are still obviously things to clean up. When it comes to the second defensive pairing for the Sharks, we have Mario Ferraro, and you know what? It was fun while it lasted, guys. That game against Detroit, Ferraro was actually quite good. The game yesterday against Dallas, he was honestly decent as well, but we are coming back down to earth now. Ferraro was not very good here tonight. There weren't major tons and tons of defensive mistakes. I won't say he's back to where he once was of being completely awful, but it was not a great game for him. And I actually thought what made it even worse was his lack of offense here tonight. You're really not expecting much offense from Ferraro, but you are hoping for him to at least make decent plays at the blue line. And there were multiple times here this game where a player like Celebrini would work it to Ferraro in a relatively easy spot to make a play, and he'd end up fumbling the pass twice. I can recall just off the top of my head where the puck ends up getting cleared because of a bad play at the blue line by Mario Ferraro. And so it is not just the defensive play that was lacking here tonight, it was also the offensive play on top of that. When it comes to Timothy Liljegren, I thought offensively Liljegren did some okay things. He actually had a few decent shifts in the O-zone where he was keeping pucks alive at the blue line. He still hasn't gotten to that point where he's able to actually make a good play with it there, but at the very least he is someone who is able to hold on to the puck and make a pass or make a shot that is decent enough and already above like half of the Sharks' other defensemen. From a defensive standpoint, I don't think this was the best game from Liljegren. There were some inconsistencies for sure here tonight, but I don't think it was awful either. And when it comes to the Sharks' third defensive pairing, we do have Jack Thompson stepping back into the lineup here. He actually ends up replacing Henry Thrun, which is something that I just don't really agree with. I understand the perspective. You don't want a third defensive pairing of Thrun and Thompson. They're both younger guys that maybe Warsofsky doesn't have a ton of faith in. But the fact is that when you put put Thompson here, you're playing two right-handed defensemen, and that's just simply not optimal. We saw it actually in the third period of this game. The Sharks actually had Thompson taking a decent amount of shifts, because even though Ryan Warsofsky is so willing to healthy scratch Thompson, when he's actually in the lineup, he does recognize that Thompson does bring an offensive spark to this team, and so he's willing to give him these offensive zone draws and hoping that it actually does work out. And there were multiple times where he found himself either with his usual defensive partner Ruda, or even when they're loading up a bit offensively, like with Liljegren, both of them being right-handed defensemen, where it just looked a little bit awkward. And it's hard to really blame Thompson when he's sort of making some tougher plays on the left side of the ice on his backhand, because it is usually something that he shouldn't have to be playing. And so if you want to get Thompson into the lineup, and I really think that you should want to, he should be replacing Jan Ruda and then have him play with Henry Thrun. I understand again that the faith might not be there, but since this is at the end of the day a development year for the San Jose Sharks, I don't know why you wouldn't want to give both of your offensive guys at least a semi-consistent look. It doesn't mean that Jan Ruda has to remain a healthy scratch for 50 games in a row. If Thrun or Thompson have a bad game, you can get Jan Ruda in there for a couple and then bring him back out. But right now, this idea of Jan Ruda playing all 82 games of the season just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Speaking of Ruda, though, when it came to his game here tonight, it was a step back for sure from yesterday, where I thought Jan Ruda was actually pretty good. He wasn't the worst defenseman on the night for the San Jose Sharks, but I don't think he really brought a ton to the team either. And then that'll do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Saturday. That will be the game against the Buffalo Sabres, which more notably is also the night that the Sharks are retiring Joe Thornton's number. Interesting that it happens on a night against the Buffalo Sabres, because when Thornton was playing with the Sharks basically never managed to actually beat Buffalo. So maybe it is Thornton getting the last laugh here in this one, a final victory against the Buffalo Sabres, a team that eluded him so many times. But that's going to be a very fun ceremony, a very, I guess, emotional ceremony as well. We saw the Sharks retire Patrick Marleau's number last year, and that was a big thing. And Thornton, honestly, I'd even put above Patrick Marleau. Even though Marleau is Mr. San Jose, Thornton really epitomizes what the Sharks were for so long as that competitive franchise. And so the number 19 heading up into the rafters, and hopefully the Sharks can carry that momentum into a victory. Class dismissed.